As the sound of the slap echoed through the cabin, a hush fell over the plane. Passengers sat frozen, their eyes wide, caught between disbelief and horror. The flight attendant, Jessica, stood with her hand still raised, her face a mix of shock and defiance. Ethan Williams, the man she had struck, slowly turned his head back to face her, the red imprint of her hand visible on his cheek. His expression was not of anger, but of a quiet, profound disappointment. Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, his movements calm and deliberate. He reached into his modest black backpack, pulling out a sleek leather folder. With the same unyielding composure, he opened it and handed a document to Jessica. "Perhaps you should take a look at this," he said, his voice steady, echoing through the silent cabin. Jessica took the paper with trembling hands. As she read the bold header, Aircraft Ownership Certification, her face turned ghostly pale. The name Ethan Williams stood out unmistakably. She looked up at him, her lips parting in a silent apology, her arrogance crumbling in real time. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Instead, he turned to the other passengers and said, "Every day people are judged by their appearances, by their clothes, by assumptions. Today, I hope we all learn to look a little deeper, to treat each other with a bit more kindness and respect." The cabin remained silent, the weight of his words sinking in. The pilot, having heard the commotion, appeared from the cockpit. His expression changed as Ethan handed him the ownership document. Without another word, Jessica was quietly escorted off the plane. And as the flight continued, the passengers knew they had witnessed more than just a confrontation. They had seen a lesson in humility and the undeniable truth that true power lies in patience, respect, and unwavering dignity. If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories that challenge perspectives and inspire change, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our channel. If this touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for being part of this journey. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. The morning sun had just begun to cast a soft golden glow over Hampton Private Airport in New York, a place where luxury and efficiency intertwined seamlessly. The terminal hummed with quiet energy, a stark contrast to the chaotic hustle of commercial airports. Here, everything moved with a purpose, from the polished black town cars gliding to the entrance, to the attendants in crisp uniforms, managing every detail with practiced poise. The air was filled with the subtle scent of fresh coffee and the gentle hum of private jets preparing for takeoff. Rows of sleek planes lined the tarmac, their polished exteriors reflecting the morning light. Each jet was a testament to wealth and status, a symbol of the ultra-wealthy who moved through this exclusive world as easily as others might navigate a public bus station. Among the travelers, business magnates and celebrities moved with quiet confidence, their entourages managing luggage and itineraries. The atmosphere was one of quiet power, where small nods and brief handshakes could signify multi-million-dollar deals. Everything about Hampton Private Airport whispered privilege and discretion, a hidden world where the elite mingled away from the public eye. Amidst this world of affluence stood Ethan Williams, a man who, at first glance, did not seem to belong. He moved with an easy grace, but his attire suggested anything but wealth. Dressed in a gray hoodie, slightly worn jeans, and simple white sneakers, he looked more like a man headed to a casual coffee shop than a private jet. His only luggage was a modest black backpack, the kind that might carry a laptop or a change of clothes for a short trip. There was no entourage trailing him, no assistant juggling his schedule or managing his bags. Ethan's face, framed by a neatly trimmed beard and thoughtful brown eyes, held a calm expression. He was in his early 40s, but the youthful energy in his stride made him appear younger. He was neither rushed nor distracted, taking in his surroundings with quiet curiosity. Unlike the other travelers who often moved with a sense of importance, Ethan seemed almost invisible. People glanced at him, their eyes sliding over him as if he were part of the background. There was nothing in his appearance to suggest that he was a billionaire, a tech entrepreneur who had built a digital empire from the ground up. His company, InnovateX, had revolutionized the tech industry with advancements in artificial intelligence, earning him a place on Forbes's list of the world's wealthiest individuals. Yet, Ethan had always preferred a life of simplicity, valuing experiences and human connections over material displays of wealth. His humility was not an act, but a deeply ingrained part of who he was, a legacy of his upbringing in a modest neighborhood where he learned early on that respect was earned through actions, not status. But beneath this quiet exterior lay a truth that few at the airport could imagine. Ethan Williams was not just another passenger. He was the owner of the very plane he was about to board. This was not just a private jet, but his private jet, a testament to his success and a reflection of his philosophy. While many of his peers opted for ostentatious displays of wealth, Ethan had chosen a different path, preferring to blend in rather than stand out. The plane, like him, was elegant but understated, designed for comfort and efficiency rather than excessive luxury. This subtlety often led to misunderstandings, as people frequently misjudged him based on his appearance. Today would be no exception. There was a tension in the air, a sense that the ordinary flow of the morning was about to be disrupted. Ethan's path was about to cross with someone whose assumptions would lead to an explosive confrontation, a clash between appearance and reality that would not only challenge perceptions but also spark a conversation about prejudice and the importance of seeing beyond the surface. The story that was about to unfold would be more than just a misunderstanding on a plane. It would be a lesson in humility, respect, and the profound impact of how we treat those we think we understand but do not truly see. Jessica Miller moved through the cabin with the practiced precision of a seasoned professional. At 35, she had spent over a decade as a flight attendant, building a reputation for her no-nonsense approach and impeccable standards. She prided herself on maintaining the kind of premium experience that first-class passengers expected. Every detail mattered to her, from the perfectly folded blankets to the seamless service of champagne before takeoff. Jessica had seen it all: celebrities, CEOs, and dignitaries, and she had learned to manage expectations with a polished smile and an ironclad adherence to protocol. For Jessica, order was everything. She had developed a knack for reading people at a glance, a skill honed through years of dealing with all types of personalities. Her instinct rarely failed her, and in a world where appearances often dictated expectations, Jessica had learned to trust her gut. When she saw Ethan Williams sitting comfortably in the plush leather seat of first class, something about him didn't fit. His worn jeans and simple hoodie seemed out of place among the tailored suits and designer dresses of the other passengers. Her initial thought was that he had wandered into the wrong section, a mix-up she had handled countless times before. Jessica approached him with a smile that was polite but edged with a hint of condescension. "Excuse me, sir," she began, keeping her voice low and professional. "I believe there might have been a mistake. This section is reserved for first-class passengers." Her tone carried an unspoken message. "You don't belong here." Ethan looked up at her, his expression calm and untroubled. "I believe I am in the right seat," he responded, his voice even and respectful. He reached into his backpack and produced his boarding pass, extending it to her with a steady hand. Jessica took the pass, her fingers brushing the smooth paper as she examined it. Everything seemed to be in order: the seat number, the first-class designation, even the name. Ethan Williams. Still, something in her hesitated. She couldn't quite reconcile the casual appearance of the man before her with the premium surroundings. She handed the boarding pass back, her smile still in place but her eyes sharp. "I'll just double-check with the manifest," she said, the words crisp and final. She turned on her heel, her posture rigid as she made her way toward the front of the cabin. Behind her, Ethan settled back into his seat, his face giving nothing away. The passengers nearby shifted slightly, some pretending not to notice while others exchanged quiet glances. Jessica's instincts told her there was more to this situation, and as she moved to consult with the lead steward, a sense of unease crept into the polished calm of the first-class cabin. Jessica returned with a forced smile, the the kind that barely reached her eyes. She had checked the manifest, but something still didn't sit right with her. The name Ethan Williams matched the seat, but in her mind there had to be an explanation. A last-minute swap, or perhaps an assistant filling in for a more prominent passenger. She had seen it happen before, and she wasn't about to let standards slip under her watch. Her voice held a sharper edge this time as she leaned toward Ethan, her professional facade cracking just enough to reveal her impatience. "Sir, as I mentioned earlier, this section is reserved for first-class passengers. If you could show me your boarding pass again, I'll make sure everything is in order." Ethan met her gaze, his expression still calm. He handed her the boarding pass without a word, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Jessica glanced at it again, but this time her skepticism overruled the facts staring back at her. "I see," she said slowly, her tone cooling further. "There must be a mix-up. I'll need you to move to the rear section until we can sort this out." Her voice rose just enough to draw the attention of nearby passengers. A few heads turned subtly, eyes darting over the tops of magazines and from behind phone screens. Some passengers shifted in their seats, discomfort evident in the way they avoided looking directly at the unfolding scene. Others watched with open curiosity, sensing the brewing tension. Ethan remained seated, his demeanor unchanged. "I'm quite sure this is my seat," he replied softly, the hint of firmness in his tone a quiet reminder of his certainty. Jessica's patience wore thin. She leaned in closer, her expression now openly critical. "Sir, if you don't comply, I'll have to involve the captain. We need to maintain order in the cabin, and this is not the place for misunderstandings." The word misunderstandings hung in the air, carrying an implication that everyone within earshot could grasp. It was no longer just about a seating arrangement, it was about belonging. The passengers closest to the exchange shared quick, uneasy glances. A woman in a tailored business suit tightened her grip on her designer handbag, while a middle-aged man adjusted his glasses, his brow furrowing. The murmur of conversation that had filled the cabin moments earlier quieted, leaving only the low hum of the jet engines as a backdrop to the rising tension. Ethan, still composed, adjusted his posture slightly, his hands resting on the armrests. He looked up at Jessica, his expression neither confrontational nor submissive. "I believe if you check with the captain, you'll find that there is no mistake," he said, his words measured and clear. The calm certainty in his voice contrasted sharply with Jessica's escalating urgency. She hesitated, caught between her instinct to assert control and the nagging doubt beginning to settle at the back of her mind. The weight of the passenger's silent judgment pressed in on her, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Jessica returned, her footsteps brisk, each click of her heels a sharp punctuation in the now silent cabin. Her earlier polite demeanor had vanished, replaced by an unmistakable air of authority. The forced smile was gone, her lips pressed into a thin line as if the very act of speaking to Ethan had become an inconvenience. She stood over him, her shadow cutting across his seat, and leaned in just enough to make her presence unavoidable. "Sir, I need you to move to the back of the plane immediately," she said, her voice louder now, clear and commanding. The professionalism in her tone was gone, replaced by a hard edge that left no room for negotiation. Her words weren't a request but an order, the kind she expected to be followed without hesitation. Ethan remained seated, his expression unchanging. He looked at her with a steady, almost curious gaze, as if he were observing an unfamiliar but mildly interesting scenario unfold. His calmness seemed to unnerve her further. Where she expected pushback or compliance, she found only stillness, a quiet resistance that unsettled her. "I've shown you my ticket," he said softly, his voice as steady as ever. "I am in the correct seat." There was no defiance in his tone, only a matter-of-factness that made his words all the more powerful. His restraint stood in stark contrast to her growing agitation, each of his measured words underscoring the irrationality of her demand. Jessica's face tightened, a flush creeping up her neck. "I don't think you understand," she snapped, her voice rising. "This is not up for discussion. If you do not comply, I will have to call security." Her threat hung in the air, a heavy promise that echoed in the quiet of the cabin. A few passengers shifted in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. Some seemed conflicted, the discomfort of witnessing an escalating situation mixing with a reluctance to get involved. Others watched with barely concealed interest, the tension drawing them in like a live performance. Ethan, unflinching, met her glare with a calm that bordered on serene. "If that's what you need to do," he replied, "then please, go ahead." His voice was so calm, so measured, that it left Jessica momentarily speechless. The balance of power in their exchange had shifted, and though Jessica stood over him, it was Ethan who seemed to hold all the control. Jessica's patience finally snapped. She took a step back, her hand reaching for the small intercom button on the wall panel. Her voice came through the speakers, clipped and professional but tinged with irritation. "Security to first class, please. We have a situation that needs immediate attention." Her words hung in the air, a heavy cloud that settled uncomfortably over the passengers. A ripple of murmurs moved through the cabin, a soft undercurrent of speculation and judgment. Faces turned toward Ethan, some with curiosity, others with a subtle narrowing of the eyes. The woman in the tailored suit leaned closer to her seatmate, her lips moving in a quiet, concerned whisper. Across the aisle, an older man folded his newspaper, his brow furrowing as he glanced between Ethan and Jessica. The tension in the air was almost tangible, a static charge waiting for a spark. Jessica stood rigid, arms crossed, her expression set in a mask of authority. She had made up her mind, and there was no room for negotiation. In her stance, there was a clear message: this man did not belong here, and she intended to rectify that mistake. Ethan remained in his seat, his demeanor unchanged. His hands rested lightly on the armrests, his body language open and unthreatening. He did not flinch or fidget, did not rise to meet her aggression. His stillness only seemed to magnify the chaos building around him. A stark contrast to Jessica's escalating behavior. When security did not arrive immediately, Jessica's composure cracked further. Her face flushed, and her breathing became shallow, the cool professionalism she wore like a second skin slipping away. She leaned over him again, her voice dropping into a harsh whisper. "I am done asking, sir. Get up now." Ethan slowly raised his eyes to meet hers, his calm expression a mirror reflecting back her anger. "I am not going anywhere," he said, his voice so quiet it forced her to lean in closer. And then, as if a wire had snapped inside her, Jessica's hand shot forward. The slap landed with a sharp crack, a sound that sliced through the cabin and silenced every whisper. Heads turned fully now, eyes wide with disbelief. The woman in the business suit gasped, her manicured hand flying to her mouth. The older man dropped his newspaper, his expression shifting from curiosity to shock. A child a few rows back asked loudly, "Mommy, what happened?" His innocent voice the only sound in the otherwise frozen cabin. Ethan's head had turned with the force of the blow, his cheek already beginning to show the red imprint of her hand. For a long moment, no one moved. Even Jessica seemed paralyzed by her own action, her hands still raised, her eyes wide and unblinking. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths, as if she had shocked herself into silence. The silence stretched, a taut string threatening to snap, and when Ethan slowly turned his head back to face her, the weight of the moment settled fully on everyone in the room. His expression was not of anger, but of profound disappointment, a look that seemed to pull the air from the cabin, leaving only the crushing stillness of realization. The slap seemed to freeze time. The cabin, which had been a low hum of murmurs and whispers, fell into an eerie silence. Every passenger seemed to hold their breath, their expressions a mix of shock, discomfort, and disbelief. The echo of Jessica's hand meeting Ethan's cheek lingered, a sharp reminder of how quickly a situation could spiral out of control. Faces turned away, not wanting to acknowledge what they had witnessed, while a few stared openly, their expressions hard to decipher. It was a moment that cut through the room, sharp and cold, laying bare the rawness of judgment and assumption. Ethan remained perfectly still. His composure in the aftermath of such blatant disrespect was unsettling in its steadiness. His expression was not one of anger, but of something deeper. A kind of quiet sorrow that spoke to an experience that ran far beyond this single moment. It was the look of a man who had been here before, who knew too well the sting of prejudice cloaked in authority. His silence spoke volumes, echoing louder than any words could have. For anyone who had ever felt out of place, who had ever been judged by the color of their skin, the clothes they wore, or the space they occupied, this scene was all too familiar. It was a reminder of the unspoken rules that governed who was seen as deserving and who was not, who was given the benefit of the doubt and who was immediately questioned. There was a heaviness in the air, a weight that pressed down on everyone, forcing them to confront the discomfort within themselves. It was impossible not to wonder how they might have reacted in Jessica's position. Would they have made the same assumptions, turned a blind eye, or perhaps stood up against the injustice they were now witnessing? It was a moment that begged for reflection, not just from those on the plane, but from anyone watching this story unfold. The quiet in the cabin was more than just the absence of sound. It was the sound of realization settling in, of minds beginning to shift, and of a story taking root in the hearts of everyone who saw it. And if you've ever been in a moment where you felt unseen, misunderstood, or misjudged, maybe you can understand the depth of this silence, too. Sometimes the hardest part of these moments isn't what is said, but what is left unsaid. What would you have done? What do you think should happen next? Let me know. Your voice matters. Ethan took a slow, measured breath, his face a mask of calm, even as the sting of Jessica's slap lingered on his skin. The redness on his cheek was a stark contrast to his composed demeanor, a visible reminder of the lines that had just been crossed. He did not raise his voice, did not clench his fists or rise from his seat. Instead, he reached down slowly, his movements deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. His fingers slipped into his modest black backpack, emerging with a sleek leather portfolio. The action was so controlled, so devoid of anger, that it seemed to drain the remaining tension from the air, leaving a heavy stillness in its wake. The portfolio, its surface smooth and worn at the edges, seemed almost out of place among the luxury of first class. Ethan opened it carefully, his every move deliberate and precise. He did not fumble or rush, giving the impression that he had done this 1,000 times before. His calmness was not just disarming, it was unsettling. It was the kind of quiet confidence that left no room for doubt, the kind that made those watching question everything they thought they understood about the situation. Jessica stood frozen, her raised hand still trembling slightly, as if it had only just registered with her what she had done. Her expression shifted between confusion and fear, the color draining from her face, as Ethan finally lifted his eyes to meet hers. His gaze was steady, his voice even when he spoke. "Perhaps you should take a look at this," he said, extending a document toward her. The way he held it, between two fingers, neither aggressive nor passive, was a masterclass in quiet authority. Jessica hesitated, her breath coming in shallow, uneven bursts. The passengers around them remained still, their curiosity a tangible force. Every eye was on the piece of paper in Ethan's hand, the truth it held dangling just out of reach. Ethan did not push it toward her, did not insist. He simply waited, his expression unchanged, his calmness a mirror that forced everyone to see their own reflection. In that moment, Ethan held all the power, not through force or intimidation, but through an unshakable sense of self. His composure was not just a reaction, it was a statement, a powerful reminder that strength does not always shout. Sometimes, it simply waits. Jessica hesitated, her hand hovering inches from the document as if it might burn her. The polished leather of the portfolio gleamed under the soft cabin lights, an unassuming object holding the weight of the truth. She finally took the paper, her fingers unsteady, and brought it closer to her face. Her eyes moved over the official letterhead, the crisp black ink. The unmistakable signature at the bottom. The realization washed over her features in slow motion, like a shadow creeping across her face. The document was not just a boarding pass. It was an ownership certificate. Ethan Williams, the man she had berated, dismissed, and struck, was not only a legitimate first-class passenger, but the owner of the very plane they were standing on. Her lips parted, but no sound escaped. Her authoritative mask crumbled, revealing a raw and vulnerable expression. The horror in her eyes was not just fear of professional repercussions, but a deeper, more personal reckoning. She had not just misjudged a passenger. She had made a profound and public mistake. Her mind raced, a chaotic jumble of excuses and justifications unraveling into nothingness as the truth held its ground, undeniable and stark. The authority she had wielded so confidently now felt like a brittle shield, cracking under the weight of her own prejudice. Around them, the cabin's atmosphere shifted dramatically. Passengers who had previously turned away or exchanged knowing glances now sat with wide eyes and parted lips. A woman with a business magazine clutched it tighter, the glossy pages crinkling under her grip. An older gentleman who had earlier smirked at the unfolding scene now seemed to shrink into his seat, his expression a blend of embarrassment and disbelief. There were those who had silently sided with Jessica, nodding along with her assumptions, who now found themselves grappling with a sudden rush of guilt. Their earlier judgments hung heavy in the air, invisible but palpable. Others were still processing the revelation, their minds working to reconcile the casual man in the gray hoodie with the powerful figure the document revealed him to be. The whispers began anew, but they were different now, hushed, uncertain, a mirror to the internal dialogues happening behind every set of eyes. The energy in the cabin had turned, a pendulum swinging from judgment to introspection. It was as if a gust of cold air had swept through, clearing away the fog of assumptions and leaving only the sharp clarity of truth. The cabin had become a stage, each passenger an actor in a play where the script had suddenly been rewritten, the roles reversed, and everyone left wondering how they had found themselves in this story and what it said about them. The captain arrived quickly, his calm presence a stark contrast to the charged atmosphere of the cabin. His uniform was immaculate, his expression neutral as he approached Ethan and Jessica. He accepted the document from Jessica's trembling hands, his eyes scanning the contents with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to assessing situations quickly. As he read, his eyebrows lifted just slightly, the only outward sign of his surprise. He closed the folder gently, his demeanor shifting from neutrality to a more formal respect. "Mr. Williams," he said, his tone even, "I apologize for the misunderstanding. May I have a word with Miss Miller in private?" His voice carried just enough authority to make it clear that this was not a request. Jessica hesitated, her face pale, but the captain's unwavering gaze left no room for argument. She followed him down the narrow aisle, the eyes of the passengers following her every step. They moved through the curtain into the galley, the thin barrier doing little to dampen the sense of judgment that trailed behind them. In the cramped space of the galley, Jessica's composure crumbled. The captain closed the curtain behind them, his expression hardening as soon as they were out of sight. "What on earth were you thinking?" he demanded, his voice low but fierce. Jessica opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. "He wouldn't comply," she managed to say, the defense weak even to her own ears. I thought he was in the wrong seat." The captain's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath his skin. "You've thought wrong," he said sharply. "But worse than that, you laid hands on a passenger. The owner of this aircraft." The weight of his words settled heavily between them, a dense, suffocating truth. Jessica's mind raced, searching for an explanation that would soften the reality of what she had done. I didn't know," she stammered, the edge of panic creeping into her voice. "I was trying to maintain order." The captain's expression did not soften. "Order?" he repeated. "By slapping a man who showed no signs of aggression, who did nothing but remain calm while you escalated the situation?" His words landed like blows, each one striking at the flimsy justifications she had constructed. Her hands shook, the adrenaline of the confrontation giving way to a cold wash of fear and guilt. She saw herself as the passengers must have seen her, a woman wielding authority not with fairness, but with bias. Her actions not about order, but about control. "I didn't mean, it got out of hand," she whispered. But even as she spoke, she knew there was no excuse that could bridge the gap between her intentions and her actions. The realization hit her fully. She had not just made a mistake, she had revealed a truth about herself that she could no longer deny. Back in the cabin, the atmosphere was thick with a different kind of tension. Passengers who had been quiet now began to murmur, their voices weaving through the air like threads of a shared thought. A young woman with a laptop resting on her knees spoke softly to the man beside her. "I thought he was just... I didn't expect..." "Wow." The man nodded, his face still tight with disbelief. "Yeah, I kind of assumed too. The way she was talking to him, it seemed like he was in the wrong." Across the aisle, an elderly woman patted her husband's hand, her voice carrying a note of regret. "It's so easy to fall into those patterns, isn't it? I thought the same thing. I didn't say anything because I thought she knew best." Her husband squeezed her hand, his expression thoughtful. "Makes you wonder how often things like this happen and nobody notices, or worse, nobody cares." The conversations grew, a ripple of introspection moving through the cabin. Some passengers remained quiet, their faces drawn as they processed what they had seen. Others spoke quietly but earnestly, sharing their own stories of being misjudged or of realizing their own biases. The shift in the air was palpable, a collective acknowledgement that they had all been part of something more than just a misunderstanding on a plane. They had witnessed the raw, unfiltered consequences of prejudice, and it left a mark, an indelible reminder of how easily the truth could be obscured by the lens of assumption. Ethan stood up slowly, the weight of the moment balanced carefully in his steady posture. He turned to face the rows of passengers, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity, shame, and silent apologies. His expression was calm, his demeanor a stark contrast to the turmoil that had just unraveled. He cleared his throat softly, and though his voice was not loud, it carried through the cabin with a quiet strength that drew everyone in. "I know this has been an uncomfortable situation," he began, his tone even, "and I think it's important to address it openly." He paused, letting his words settle, allowing the passengers to breathe in the reality of the situation. "What happened here today is not an isolated incident for me. It is part of a pattern, one that has followed me through much of my life. I've been questioned, doubted, and dismissed more times than I can count, not because of my actions, but because of my appearance." His gaze moved slowly across the cabin, making eye contact with those who dared to meet his eyes. "I've learned to stay calm, to remain patient, because I know that anger or defensiveness only deepens the narrative others are too quick to write about me. But that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, and it doesn't mean it's okay." His voice softened, drawing the listeners closer. "I am not sharing this for sympathy. I am sharing this because it is an opportunity for reflection, not just for Ms. Miller, but for all of us. Myself included. We all carry biases, some conscious, some buried deep. What matters is how we choose to face them when they are brought to light." Ethan took a breath, his calm composure unwavering. "I am the owner of this plane, but more importantly, I am a human being deserving of the same respect as anyone else. The truth is, my title shouldn't matter. Whether I own this plane or simply have a ticket, I should not have to prove my worth to deserve kindness and respect." His words lingered, resonating in the quiet of the cabin. "I hope that what happened here today becomes more than just a story you share at dinner. I hope it sparks a change in how we see each other, how we treat each other when no one is watching." His message was clear, his voice a gentle but firm reminder that real change begins in moments just like this. He sat down slowly, his presence still commanding, the silence that followed not empty, but full of possibility. Ethan allowed the silence to stretch for a moment, giving his words space to breathe. His eyes moved gently over the faces in front of him, seeing not just passengers but people with their own stories, their own biases and perhaps their own regrets. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees, and continued speaking, his voice both firm and inviting. "We live in a world where it's all too easy to let appearances shape our opinions," he said. "We make snap judgments every day, often without realizing it. Whether it's the way someone dresses, the color of their skin, the language they speak, or even how they carry themselves, these fleeting impressions settle into assumptions, and assumptions can quickly become barriers." His words hung in the air, neither accusing nor absolving, but offering a mirror to everyone listening. "I've spent my life working to break down those barriers," he went on. "Not just for myself, but for others who might not have the same platform or the same opportunities. But real change doesn't happen from the top down. It happens here, in moments like this, where we are uncomfortable and where we are forced to confront the gap between who we think we are and how we actually treat others." His expression softened, a hint of empathy in his eyes. "I am not here to shame anyone. I know that bias can be unintentional, that it is often learned, a habit as old as childhood. But what we choose to do once we recognize it, that is where true character lies. It's in those small moments when we choose curiosity over judgment, compassion over assumption. I am asking everyone here today to take this moment and carry it forward, to be a little more mindful, a little more patient. It costs nothing to offer someone the benefit of the doubt, but the impact of that kindness can change everything." His voice did not waver, every word a gentle but clear call to action. "If we leave this plane today and nothing changes, then all of this has been for nothing. But if we take even a small step forward, if we use this experience to see each other a little more clearly, then perhaps this uncomfortable moment will have been worth it." The passengers remained still, the weight of his message settling into their hearts. It was not just a plea but a challenge, a quiet nudge to move from passive observers to active participants in a world that needed more understanding and less division. As his words settled, the curtain at the front of the cabin rustled softly, and Jessica reappeared. Her shoulders were no longer squared with authority, but slumped with the weight of realization. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, a stark contrast to the poised professional who had first entered the cabin. She moved slowly, each step tentative, as if the floor beneath her might give way. Stopping at the front of the aisle, she looked at Ethan first, then out over the sea of faces, some still wary, others open, waiting. Her lips parted, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. She swallowed hard, and when she finally spoke, her voice was raw and unsteady. I am so sorry," she began, her voice a fragile thread. "Not just to you, Mr. Williams, but to everyone here. My actions were inexcusable. I made assumptions. I let my biases dictate my behavior, and I hurt you. I hurt everyone who witnessed it." Her hands twisted together, fingers white with tension. "There is no excuse. All I can say is that I was wrong, and I am deeply, truly sorry." Her vulnerability filled the room, the sincerity in her apology undeniable. It was not rehearsed or polished, but real. A woman standing bare before a crowd, asking for a chance to make things right. And in that moment, the power dynamics shifted once more, not in authority, but in humility, as everyone was reminded that the path to redemption often begins with a single, honest apology. The boardroom was a world away from the tight confines of the airplane cabin, yet the weight of what had happened hung just as heavily in the air. Ethan sat at the long, polished mahogany table, his presence calm but commanding. Around him, the airline's executives shuffled in their seats, their expressions a mix of caution and concern. The CEO, a silver-haired man with a perpetual crease between his brows, opened the meeting with a perpetual apology between his brows, "Mr. Williams, on behalf of the entire company, I want to express our deepest regret for what occurred on your flight. This incident does not reflect our values." His words were smooth, practiced, but Ethan's steady gaze did not waver. He had heard apologies like this before. Too often, they were more about damage control than genuine change. Ethan waited until the room settled into silence before he spoke. "I appreciate the apology," he began, his voice steady. "But I'm not here for apologies. I'm here because what happened on that plane is not just a failure of one individual, but a reflection of a systemic issue." His words landed heavily, and the room seemed to contract around them. This isn't just about one employee making a mistake. It's about a culture that allowed her assumptions to go unchecked, that did not provide the training needed to recognize and confront biases before they become actions. He opened the portfolio on the table, the same one that had shifted the power dynamic on the plane. This time it held not proof of ownership, but a vision for change. "I've outlined a plan for a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program," he said, passing copies of the proposal to the executives. "This includes mandatory training for all employees, from entry-level to executive positions, focused on recognizing implicit biases and fostering an environment of respect and equality." He continued, "I also recommend establishing a task force dedicated to reviewing company policies through the lens of equity and inclusion. This task force should include a diverse range of voices, not just from leadership, but from all levels of the organization." His tone remained calm, but there was a firmness to his words, a clear expectation that what he was proposing was not optional. "Real change requires transparency. I propose a quarterly review, with results shared publicly, not just as a PR move, but as a commitment to accountability." The room was silent, the weight of his proposals hanging in the air. Ethan leaned back slightly, his demeanor unyielding. "I am also prepared to contribute $5 million to help fund these initiatives," he added. "But only if the company matches this investment and demonstrates a real commitment to change." His challenge was clear, a line drawn in the sand. The executives exchanged glances, their earlier composure cracking under the realization that this was not a negotiation, but a crossroads. Ethan did not press them for an immediate answer. Instead, he closed his portfolio, signaling that his piece had been said. "I am not here to force your hand," he concluded, "but I do believe that this moment offers an opportunity to lead, not just for your company, but for the entire industry. What you decide today will not only define your brand, but also set a precedent for what it means to prioritize human dignity in every interaction." With that, he stood, his quiet departure leaving a profound silence in his wake. A silence filled not with discomfort, but with the heavy weight of possibility. Ethan's $5 million offer hung in the air like a challenge waiting to be met. It was not just a gesture of goodwill, but a test of resolve, a line drawn clearly between symbolic gestures and real, measurable change. His tone had been calm, devoid of any bravado, but every word had been meticulously chosen to leave no room for misinterpretation. He wasn't offering charity. He was extending a challenge. The executives around the table shifted slightly, their expressions a mix of surprise and calculation. They were not accustomed to being on the receiving end of ultimatums, especially from someone who had every right to demand retribution, but instead chose the higher ground of reform. Ethan had framed his offer not as a gift, but as an opportunity, a chance for the airline to lead by example and set a new standard within the industry. His conditions were simple but powerful. The airline must match his investment, dollar for dollar, and every cent must go directly into building a more inclusive and equitable workplace. This was not about optics or appeasement, but about committing to a structural change that would outlast any single employee or headline. Ethan made it clear that his focus was not on seeking a personal apology or a superficial fix to the situation. He was not interested in the typical corporate response, a quick apology, a suspension, perhaps a public relations statement emphasizing the airline's commitment to diversity. He had seen those before, and he knew how hollow they could be. Instead, his emphasis was on building a foundation that could support lasting change. "I'm not here for an apology," he said. "An apology doesn't change anything for the next person who might find themselves in a similar situation. What matters is that you take concrete steps to ensure this doesn't happen again." His voice was steady, unwavering, each word a deliberate choice. I want to see training programs that don't just tick a box but transform how your employees interact with every customer, every colleague. I want to see policies reviewed through a lens of equity, ensuring that respect and dignity are not just words in your mission statement, but a lived experience." He leaned back slightly, his presence still strong, a reminder that the true measure of an organization is not how it handles success, but how it responds to its failures. The executives listened, not just hearing his words, but absorbing the responsibility he was placing on their shoulders. Ethan's approach was not about punishment, but about progress, not about assigning blame, but about building a better future. His vision was clear, his expectations firm, and now the weight of change rested, not with him, but with those who had the power to make it a reality. The airline's leadership did not take long to respond to Ethan's proposal. Within weeks, a formal announcement was made outlining their commitment to implementing a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program. The company pledged not only to match Ethan's $5 million investment, but also to exceed it, dedicating additional resources to ensure the initiative's success. Press releases detailed the planned changes, highlighting a new era of accountability and respect. The airline's CEO appeared in interviews, not with scripted statements, but with a candid acknowledgement of past shortcomings and a genuine commitment to improvement. This transparency set the tone for what would become a profound cultural shift within the organization. The new training programs went beyond the standard corporate workshops. Rather than a single afternoon of slideshows and handouts, employees engaged in immersive sessions designed to confront implicit biases and encourage empathy. They participated in role-playing exercises that put them in the shoes of those who often felt marginalized or misunderstood. They heard stories from colleagues and customers who shared real experiences of discrimination and learned how seemingly small actions and words could contribute to a broader culture of exclusion or inclusion. The impact was immediate and visible. Flight attendants and ground staff alike began to approach their roles with a renewed sense of purpose. Passengers noticed a difference, not just in the service, but in the subtle but powerful shift in the way they were treated. Staff members who once moved through their routines on autopilot now engaged more openly, their interactions marked by genuine curiosity and respect. Jessica, the flight attendant whose actions had sparked this change, also became an integral part of the transformation. Having completed the training herself, she volunteered to share her story during the sessions. She spoke openly about her mistakes, her biases, and the journey of self-reflection that had followed. Her vulnerability became a teaching tool, offering a powerful reminder that growth often begins with the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The airline's program quickly gained recognition beyond its own terminals. Other companies reached out to learn from their approach, and soon the airline's model became a template for change across the industry. What had started as a painful moment of public shame had evolved into a catalyst for lasting, positive change, not just within one company, but across an entire sector. And all of it had begun with one man's refusal to let prejudice go unchallenged, and his insistence that real change required more than words. It demanded action. Jessica's transformation was neither quick nor easy, but it was genuine. After the incident, she took a leave of absence, not just as part of the airline's disciplinary measures, but by her own choice. She knew that to truly make amends, she needed to confront the biases that had led to her actions. During this time, she sought counseling and attended workshops focused on understanding implicit bias and systemic prejudice. She immersed herself in books, documentaries, and discussions, not just passively, but with a hunger to understand perspectives outside her own. The turning point came when Jessica began volunteering with local organizations dedicated to promoting diversity and inclusion. She found herself drawn to programs that facilitated honest dialogues between people from different backgrounds. Through these interactions, she realized that her journey was not just about correcting her own behavior, but about helping others recognize and dismantle their biases as well. When the airline invited her to become a part of their new training initiative, she hesitated at first, worried that her past would overshadow her message. But Ethan encouraged her, reminding her that true redemption lay not in erasing her mistakes, but in using them to spark change. With his support, Jessica began sharing her story during training sessions. She spoke openly about the assumptions she had made, the damage those assumptions caused, and the hard work required to rebuild trust. Her vulnerability turned out to be her greatest strength. Employees responded to her honesty, seeing in her a reflection of their own struggles with bias. She became a bridge between the uncomfortable truth of prejudice and the hope of understanding. Her story served as a powerful example that change was not only possible, but also a continuous process of growth and self-awareness. Over time, Jessica became a sought-after speaker, not just within the airline but at conferences and workshops across the industry. She stood before audiences, not as the woman who had made a grave mistake, but as someone who had found the courage to face it head-on. Her journey from judgment to advocacy became a beacon for others, proving that the most powerful advocates for change often come from those who have walked the path themselves. The ripple effects of the airline's changes extended far beyond its own walls. Other companies, both within the aviation industry and beyond, began to take notice. Executives from corporations across different sectors reached out to learn more about the airline's diversity program. Media outlets picked up the story, not just highlighting the initial incident, but focusing on the transformation that followed. Headlines shifted from scandal to success, from a cautionary tale to a model of proactive change. News segments featured interviews with employees who shared how the training had impacted not only their work environment, but also their personal lives. The airline's approach became a template for best practices in corporate responsibility and inclusion. The story evolved into a powerful narrative about how a single incident, handled with integrity and commitment to growth, could lead to a broader cultural shift. Other organizations began adopting similar training initiatives, and industry panels frequently cited the airline as a leading example of how to turn a negative moment into a lasting legacy of improvement. The airline's journey showed that real change was not about avoiding mistakes, but about how an organization responded to them, with honesty, humility, and a relentless drive to do better. Months passed, and life moved forward. But for Jessica, the weight of that day on the plane never fully left her. Each time she stood before a group to share her story, she felt the sting of that moment, the slap, the silence, the unraveling of her own prejudices. She had become a vocal advocate for change, but there was still a lingering thread left untied, a conversation she needed to have. After much thought, she reached out to Ethan through the airline's liaison, requesting a meeting. She did not know if he would agree. She prepared herself for a refusal, understanding that he owed her nothing. But when his assistant called to arrange a time, a mixture of relief and anxiety settled over her. On the day of their meeting, Jessica arrived early at the quiet cafe they had chosen. She ordered a cup of tea but barely touched it, her hands wrapped around the warm cup as if seeking comfort. When Ethan walked in, he greeted her with the same calm demeanor she remembered. He moved through the room with an unassuming confidence, his presence not loud but unmistakable. He took a seat across from her, offering a small, genuine smile. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I've thought about that day so many times, about the things I did, the things I said. I'm truly sorry, not just for what I did to you, but for the mindset that allowed it to happen." She spoke openly about her journey since then, the hard truths she had faced, and the work she had done to understand and change. "I've learned that it's not enough to just apologize. I needed to understand why I acted that way and to do better moving forward. I hope, through my work, I can help others avoid the mistakes I made." Ethan listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he took a moment before responding. "I appreciate your honesty," he said. "Redemption is not about erasing the past, but about learning from it. What matters most to me is that you've turned this into something meaningful, not just for yourself, but for others." His words were not a free pass, but a recognition of the effort she had put into changing. "We all carry biases," he continued. "What defines us is how we respond when those biases are brought to light. You could have hidden from this, let the embarrassment turn into resentment, but instead you chose to confront it. That takes courage." Jessica felt a wave of gratitude, a warmth that spread through the coldness of her own doubts. "Thank you," she said. "I know I still have a long way to go, but I am committed to doing the work, to making sure my actions reflect the person I want to be, not the person I was." Ethan nodded, a sense of closure settling between them. "It's about progress, not perfection," he said. "And I think your story will help others find the strength to look at their own biases. That's powerful." The conversation continued, not as adversaries or even as teacher and student, but as two people connected by a shared understanding of how one moment can change everything. They spoke of the airline's initiatives, the progress made, and the stories of those who had been touched by Jessica's openness. When they parted, it was not just with polite goodbyes, but with a genuine sense of respect and understanding. As Jessica walked away, there was a lightness in her step that had not been there for a long time. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just in her work but in her everyday interactions. She had learned that redemption was not a destination, but a path, and she intended to keep walking it with integrity and humility. Ethan sat for a moment longer, watching as life moved around him. He reflected on how powerful forgiveness could be, not just for the person who received it, but for the one who offered it. He had seen a broken moment transformed into an opportunity for growth, and had watched someone turn a mistake into a mission. His choice to forgive was not about forgetting, but about releasing the weight of that moment and allowing it to become something more. He knew the impact of that day on the plane would continue to ripple outwards, not only through Jessica's advocacy, but through every person who heard their story and found within it a reason to challenge their own assumptions. It was a reminder that every choice mattered, that every interaction had the potential to change not just a moment, but a life. And in that quiet cafe as he rose to leave, Ethan felt a sense of peace, knowing that sometimes the most profound changes began with a single, brave conversation. Ethan sat by the window of his office, the city skyline stretching out before him like an ever-changing canvas. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, and the world outside seemed to move at a different pace. He often found solace in these quiet moments, allowing his thoughts to drift, to settle. His mind wandered back to that day on the plane, a moment that had started as a small discomfort and unfolded into a catalyst for change. It was not the first time he had been misjudged, nor would it likely be the last. The experience had stayed with him, not because of the slap or the embarrassment, but because of what it revealed about the world they lived in. He thought about how easy it was for a single assumption to snowball into a larger injustice. A quiet dismissal, a quick judgment, a whispered word. Each one a small stone that, when thrown, could create ripples far beyond what the eye could see. The slap had been a literal manifestation of the metaphorical slaps he had endured throughout his life, a reminder that no matter how much success he achieved, there would always be moments when he would need to prove his worth, not because of his capabilities, but because of his appearance. Ethan had built his career on breaking barriers, on challenging the status quo, yet even he was not immune to the sting of prejudice. But instead of letting it embitter him, he chose to let it strengthen his resolve. He knew that change rarely came from loud declarations or grand gestures, but from the quiet, persistent work of pushing back against the everyday biases that went unchallenged. He saw the transformation at the airline, the shift in Jessica, and the conversations that had sparked in boardrooms and break rooms. His story had become a touchstone, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder that every moment carried the potential for growth and learning. What mattered most to him was not the apology or the accolades, but the small stories he heard. About a flight attendant who took an extra moment to listen to a passenger, an employee who questioned their first impression, a company that revisited its policies with a fresh perspective. These were the true measures of success, the real evidence that change was taking root. He understood that the work was not done, that it might never be done. Bias was a weed that needed constant attention, pulling it out by the roots only to find new shoots appearing elsewhere. But he was not discouraged. He had always believed that progress was not about perfection, but about persistence. His story was a reminder of how powerful it could be to stand firm in the face of prejudice, to choose patience over anger and action over silence. In the fading light, he felt a quiet contentment, knowing that the ripples of his actions were still moving outward, touching lives he might never see, but whose stories would be better for it. Ethan knew that his story had the power to do more than just entertain or inform. It had the potential to spark real, lasting change. As he prepared to share his experience on a broader platform, he chose his words carefully, not wanting to preach but to invite. He started by posing a simple yet profound question. Have you ever let your assumptions guide your actions? What did you learn from it? His voice was gentle, his tone reflective, as if he were speaking directly to each person individually. He did not accuse or judge. Instead, he created a space for honesty and introspection. He continued, "We all make snap judgments. It's part of being human. But what we do with those moments, how we choose to respond, can make all the difference. Sometimes it's not about being right, but being willing to be wrong and learning from it." Ethan wanted his story to be more than a cautionary tale. He envisioned it as the start of a dialogue, a way for others to examine their own experiences and share their stories. "I'd love to hear your thoughts," he said, his sincerity clear. "Have you ever found yourself in a situation where your assumptions were challenged? What did you do next? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your voice matters." His approach was not about gaining followers or views, but about building a community of thoughtful engagement. He framed the conversation not as an end, but as a beginning, a chance to connect and learn from one another. His goal was to transform his platform into a space where difficult conversations could happen with respect and openness, where learning and growth were encouraged. Ethan believed that every story shared, every perspective offered, could help chip away at the walls of misunderstanding and build bridges toward empathy and acceptance. As he closed, his goodbye was not a scripted sign-off, but a heartfelt expression of gratitude. "Thank you for being part of this story," he said, his voice warm. "Every comment, every share, is not just an interaction. It's a step towards a more understanding world. You are not just watching, you are part of this movement, helping to create a ripple effect of kindness and awareness." He reminded his audience that real change did not happen in grand gestures alone, but in everyday choices, in the quiet courage of challenging assumptions and choosing compassion. Stay curious, stay open, and most importantly, stay committed to seeing the world through a lens of empathy. Together we can make a difference, one story, one conversation at a time. His words lingered, leaving behind not just a message, but a call to action that felt personal and powerful. A reminder that each viewer had a role to play in building a better, more inclusive world.